Hello, this is Temslavnim Potushenu Garantu. Today we'll review several interesting statements. One of them, the main one in my opinion, is that the US is withdrawing from the negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine. The US was the only party, and at the same time, the only side with which both Ukraine and Russia could communicate. And suddenly they were gone. It's unclear who will take their place now. But statements immediately followed from both Ukraine and Russia. And there's just so much to clean up there, like Hercules cleaning out the Augean stables. So today we'll take a look at all of this. But before we start, I'll show you a video of how people in Ukraine are gradually starting to rise up against these very draft officers. And it's really intense here, I can't show the whole video. But here they freed a young man who had been forced into a van. And this fills my soul, let's say, with happiness. Not just let's say, it really does, because I rejoice every time something like this happens. Just imagine these people who are being forced into vans. And suddenly salvation comes in the form of ordinary, once again, people, Ukrainian citizens who care, who pull them out of those black vans, so to speak, which used to burn in Ukraine. Those vans, you know, Stalin and all that. And now we see the same thing happening. And here we see how people are filling the whole street. This whole street, and more. Before the person is taken away. And these draft officers leave in shame. You can watch all of this on my channel. Here it is. Point your phone or tablet camera at this QR code and you'll go straight to my Telegram channel. Or if you're watching me from a mobile device, there will be a link to this channel right here. Well, let's get started. Look, the statement from the US about withdrawing from the negotiation process was quite unexpected. Here, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, stated that the United States has officially stopped participating in the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Why? There's no progress in the dialogue. The US simply has nothing to do here. One step forward, two steps back. I've been repeating this for about 2 years now, and Washington can now return to the role of mediator, only if there are constructive results which are not visible yet. Rubio stated that Washington agreed to play the role of mediator in the negotiations because both sides were willing to communicate specifically with the US and were not ready to communicate with each other. But the negotiations did not bring any results and naturally were not effective. If you don't believe me, here is his direct statement.
Yes, agreements on the Ukrainian alliance led by America. We're involved.
He says that we were involved.
We were told only we could do it. We were the only ones.
Who were involved? As the country with which the Russians and Ukrainians were willing to communicate.
We were involved, but they were ineffective.
Well, and let's just say these negotiations were not satisfactory.
We are ready to continue this role despite the problems.
Well, and the US says that in the person of Rubio. Naturally, the Secretary of State represents the US along with Trump, that dove of peace, and says that we remain ready for negotiations despite all sorts of problems.
That's true, despite the stories that we forced the Ukrainians to take this or that position, which we don't believe.
Despite the untrue story, he says. By the way, it's interesting that the US was forcing Ukraine to take certain actions, let's say, or make certain decisions. And that's interesting because I haven't made a single video about the US forcing Ukraine to make concessions to Russia and, for example, to give up those very 20 territories of Donbass that are still under Ukraine's control. Rubio says that none of this is true, although in my opinion there's a difference. Before he mentioned some moments that seemed quite plausible. But who are we to judge?
If we see an opportunity to have conversations that are productive, not counterproductive.
Well, these are the usual words, that the US has a view that, or rather they wanted to be productive to spur negotiations that would be productive, not counterproductive.
We have the opportunity to hold talks to be productive. We are ready for them to be productive. There are no such talks at the moment.
Currently, there are no productive negotiations. It's basically the same situation. He repeats himself like Trump and dislikes it, speaking as if addressing children. That is, he keeps saying that America is great, well, without any doubt. Then he says that they're bad, they're good on the other side. Then he says they should pay because for some reason they have to pay some taxes or raise all sorts of tariffs. But in general, both Trump and Rubio speaks in roughly the same choppy phrases. these phrases, you see, mean a lot. For example, Rubio says once again there was no US pressure on Ukraine, which is what I meant. But he also remains ready to take part in further diplomatic efforts if necessary. Wonderful! Let's give a round of applause, dear viewers. Rubio stated that negotiations involving Washington are not taking place because there is no significant progress in the process. That's exactly what we were talking about. Well, actually, if there is a real chance of reaching agreements, then the US is ready to join again. Then Rubio, what I like is what he said at the end, the part I didn't show. But by the way, sorry for interrupting your contemplation of this article. So he says that in recent months, Washington hasn't seen significant progress, but the war between Ukraine and Russia, in the opinion of the US, is unlikely to end militarily. A victory for one of the sides in the classical sense. And moreover, he emphasized the phrase that we all know, that any war ends with negotiations between the parties involved in that war. And here, indeed, that's exactly how it is. If you agree or disagree, write in the comments and be sure to subscribe to this wonderful channel that you are watching. There's a lot more. Watch! As a result of the fact that the US is withdrawing from the negotiation process, at least openly, they are not claiming to be some kind of moderator between the parties. So they're leaving and Russia and Ukraine can do what they want. They can launch nuclear warheads at each other. If they have them, really they can. They can attack each other. They can use any weapons, long-range ones actually. Or they can use something else, drones, missiles, all sorts of flamings. They can use all of that. It's possible to use. And right away, all sorts of insinuations appeared, including the idea that May 22, which seems like a spring day, didn't bring anything good. Zelensky says that a sudden threat has emerged for the Volyn, Zhytomyr and Rivne regions. I'm mentioning this because I already brought it up earlier. Zelensky stated that an attack on Ukraine is being prepared from Belarusian territory, and Ukraine may launch a preemptive strike. By the way, I was surprised in the comments that not everyone knows what preemptive means. Preemptive means in advance. It's a strike in advance if you know about some kind of threat. Well, I mean, if one of your neighbors at your dacha is planning to steal your potatoes, you can steal their potatoes first, roughly speaking. Well, or you could report it to the police or attack your neighbor and intimidate him so he doesn't steal your potatoes. There are different possible scenarios here. Zelensky says that the offensive from Belarus will be aimed at Rivne, Zhytomyr and Volyn. The western regions of Ukraine are under tremendous threat. And that's exactly why the head of the Ukrainian state visited the Rivne region. And he clarified that there is also a threat of an offensive from Belarus for these Ukrainian regions. Here he states all this several times.
France, Germany, the E3 format. This week there may be an update on the Americans' readiness. And of course, a lot depends on how the situation with Iran develops. America is focused on this. We're doing everything to step up our diplomacy.
Well, in general, there's a lot of talk about everything here. As usual, diplomacy, peace for strength together with Sibiha and all the other discussions that have already taken place before. They're provoking Russia, the US isn't here, we're so powerful, Cordona, I think he's just a border guard. I think he's just generating, there's something called a random number generator, people in IT know this. Well, getting a truly random number is actually pretty hard. That's why there are pseudo-random number generators, and in this case we have a pseudo-random statement. So, it's the generation of different phrases that appear in almost every video of Zelensky. He once again emphasized the possibility of an offensive from Belarus, and now journalists are saying that the length of the Ukrainian-Belarusian border is about 1,000 kilometers. Right now, just for a moment, the length of the front between Ukraine and Russia is 4,000 kilometers, if I remember correctly. Along this 1,000 kilometers, there are 5 Ukrainian regions. In the comments, people said I didn't name them. Well, here they are. Volyn, Rivne, Zhytomyr, Kiev, and Chernihiv. And there was already a first attempt at an offensive from Belarus in February 2022. At that time, 2 out of the 5 regions were affected, Kiev and Chernihiv. But now, according to Zelensky, an offensive from Belarus is being planned. And Lukashenko, by the way, responded to all this saying, Listen, Volodymyr Alexandrovich, we can meet with you anytime, anywhere, at any point in the world. That is, for example, Putin makes a statement suggesting to meet in Moscow. Naturally, Zelensky does not go there. Props to Lukashenko just says we can meet anywhere in the world. Even on Antonariva or somewhere in Kaubiviardi or in Belarus or in Kiev, Lukashenko is ready to fly and travel anywhere for the sake of peace. Well, I'm exaggerating, maybe not exactly for peace, but definitely for negotiations. At the same time, Lukashenko is a much better moderator of this negotiation process than the US. Because, first of all, Lukashenko knows Putin very well and is, well, you could say his comrade. As for being friends, I don't know, but comrade, definitely. Secondly, more or less, there is, or at least there used to be, communication. Now someone denies it, but still. And in my opinion, Lukashenko could actually be the facilitator, there's such a word, of this meeting between Putin and Zelensky. That is, he can smooth out some points of tension and stimulate the negotiation process to move in the right direction. For us, first and foremost, dear viewers, not for those who trade weapons and fish in such muddy waters that you could say they're digging the fish out of the dirt just to get some profits. But so far as I know, Zelensky hasn't responded to Lukashenko's proposal. If he has, correct me in the comments. At least the proposal exists and it's still up in the air. Well, as for Russia and Ukraine, the exchange of strikes continues. There's nothing new here overall. It's terrible, no doubt about it, but unfortunately this has been going on for many, many months. So, for example, Ukraine, again, since the US is not participating in the negotiation process, stated that, well, we will attack whatever we want. Novorossiysk is being attacked and there's an oil refinery there. A fire broke out at the oil depot and here they are all shown, these flashes, these explosions, all of it. And fires often break out in the area, naturally. At the same time, I already mentioned that the volume of petroleum products from the Russian Federation has dropped by 40%. Some gifted commentators claimed, come on, these oil refineries, these little white tanks, they're worthless. I remember some commentator once said that Russian oil and gas companies and organizations spend much more on their corporate parties than the cost of this oil refinery or these tanks filled with fuel. And then suddenly the numbers come in showing that the volume of oil products supplied by Russia has dropped by 40%. Well, that's some corporate party, you could say. Then there are no casualties, no one died, but right here it's like an apocalypse. It's like some kind of apocalypse today in Novorossiysk. It's just crazy. Oil terminals, but naturally the Russian Federation is already attacking as well. They attacked Poltava, damaged houses, one administrative building, and a fire broke out. This happened overnight into Saturday, May 23rd exactly. On the night of May 23rd, I'm recording this video, so this news is extremely relevant. The blast wave damaged administrative buildings and residential houses. We're being told from the scene that a fire broke out. There are no injuries, and the extent of the damage is still being clarified. Next, please pay attention here, dear viewers. We all remember when Ukraine was asking, give us weapons. Zelensky was saying, give us money, give us funds for this, and we will use it to purchase weapons, to secure various elements of infrastructure. But the main thing was, give us money, give us weapons, and we will secure our country. And then a Western publication reports that Ukraine has gone from being the one asking to being a weapons supplier for the West. A supplier of weapons. Here we have, of course, drones. The Pentagon and Kyiv are finalizing deals to test Ukrainian drones. And the Minister of Defense of Germany also signed off on the launch of the Brave Germany program with Ukrainian manufacturers. This is of course wonderful. And as this very publication reports on the page you are on, all of this is being reported by the Washington Post. The authors of the Washington Post call this change a dramatic turnaround. That's quite a twist, we might say, but we won't, because we remember that it's not really a twist. According to the assessment of these highly talented analysts, Ukraine is now more sovereign, more capable militarily, and more independent than at any time since 1991. That's how it is. And then we open the next page just on another site and we see that this very NATO Secretary General Rutte is dissatisfied that 6 European countries are paying for American weapons for Ukraine. This raises a question. On one hand, it seems like there isn't enough weaponry. On the other hand, Ukraine is exporting and selling it. Naturally, it's not the citizens of Ukraine who receive the money, but certain corporations in the country that produce all of this. And who are these corporations accountable to? Well, naturally to Yermak, Zelensky, and all the other powerful leaders. So the situation turns out like this. On one hand, huge amounts of money are allocated to provide weapons to Ukraine, and on the other hand, these same weapons, or maybe something else like drones, end up being sold somewhere else. So it's double profit. You get money to produce weapons, you make these weapons, and then you sell them somewhere else as well. Plus, there's an extra markup. Honestly, any businessman would envy a deal like that because I think even Trump wouldn't refuse it. He likes to say that deals are the most important thing in a businessman's life. And here, these are the kind of deals that any entrepreneur would envy. The same goes for Warren Buffett or Elon Musk or even Trump, who is quite an entrepreneur himself. All of them could envy this. Mark Rutte stated that the main financial burden in Europe is carried by only 67 European countries, but that's not surprising because there aren't that many driving, let's say, forces in Europe that allow progress, or at least don't let it fall too far behind. And it would be interesting if 3 Baltic countries were added to these 67 European countries. Now that would be a twist if Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia also started supplying some kind of weapons or participated on equal terms, for example with Germany in providing funds for the production of weapons that Ukraine then supplies to the US. Here the picture is perfect. Look, the US supplies weapons to Ukraine. But they don't supply them for free, they sell them at a big markup. Well, for profit, it has to be profit. Who pays for all this? Naturally not Ukraine, which has no money. Europe pays for it. Europe pays for weapons for Ukraine. Ukraine buys weapons from the US, then produces even more weapons with that money and sells them again to the US. Well, that's just perfect. It's not just pure weaponry. It's the hand of capitalism. It's a capitalist's paradise. I think very few are capable of such deals. And it's just perfect for, once again, catching all those big fish in very murky waters. How murky is it? Well, I hope I've made it clear to you. Then what? Even The Economist tells us that Europe is preparing a plan B in case the US leaves NATO. Ukraine hasn't even managed to join this NATO yet. How could they leave? It looks like the US plans to leave. And the US is basically the main financial, let's say, element of NATO. In other words, the US puts the most money into NATO. If the US leaves, NATO will fall apart. You can, of course, still join a NATO that's falling apart, but it will definitely stink there. But nevertheless, there are scenarios for defending Europe without the participation of the US and outside the alliance. It's a push. The trigger is the sharp reduction of American military presence and Donald Trump's doubts about Article 5 on collective defense. So that's how things are, dear viewers. It's just that even the devil would get lost in all these agreements. And again, we judge all this based on open sources, but there are also classified sources, and some media outlets have access to them. What's in there? It's simply mind-boggling. It seems to me there's so much there that a year, 2 or 3 after the war ends, and again there's no doubt that it will end, and Rutte here confirms our opinion, but I think there will be a lot of revelations. So many books will be written, so many memoirs, so many films made, so many articles. Well, words can hardly do it justice. And by the way, there was something else interesting I completely forgot to mention about Putin's statement. Also,
once again, in this regard, I want to address the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine, as I have done before. Do not follow the criminal orders of the illegitimate, corrupt junta. Otherwise, you yourselves become accomplices to these crimes. Although the reasons for such criminal behavior by the Kiev regime are clear. You know this better than anyone else. These are constant failures at the front. Thank you.
Speaking of failures, by the way, that's interesting. If in 2022 such a statement still made some sense, now the situation there is completely different. It's not just Ukrainians anymore, but I saw that even some Russian military correspondents are asking, why are drones flying at us? What's going on? In Moscow, people are saying, why should we have to put up with this flood of Ukrainian drones? And right away, Putin says that suddenly Ukraine is having some setbacks at the front. There are some problems. Well, honestly, throughout the entire year of 2026, there were some problems. But you can't really call them failures. I'll make a separate video about this. By the way, all of this is available. But it's quite strange. Anyway, I leave it to you, dear viewers, to judge all of this. You undoubtedly understand military matters better than I do. So write in the comments what you think about this. Why did Putin announce that there are failures on the Ukrainian front right now? When? It would seem, well, Ukrainian drones are flying to Novorossiysk, Rostov, Tuapse, and many other cities where there are oil refineries. And again, when analysts in several countries at once confirmed that the volume of oil products coming from Russia is dropping by about 40%, I read about this. Naturally, I can't come myself with a calculator and count it all up. And I think even the customs officers and border guards in Russia would look at me strangely. But in general, it would be interesting to see all of this, to film everything as a movie. So write in the comments what you think about this. And again, don't forget to subscribe to this wonderful channel. Bye, everyone.
Yesterday, there was news from Mikhailo Fedorov that Ukraine has developed its own guided aerial bomb. Today, information has appeared that the Ukrainian guided aerial bomb costs about a third as much than the American JDAM kits. So, what prospects does the new Ukrainian-made guided aerial bomb open up for our armed forces? And
we don't have a combat aircraft that could drop 3 tons.